In this episode of our photography review show, we're gonna review images from 33 photographers. Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of our photography review show in 2022. For those who don't know me, my name is Jakub Boris, and I'm a professional photographer based in West Sussex, England. Now for the past 2 or 3 years, I've been reviewing photos of my friends and colleagues, and it's something that's been very popular. And this is the reason why we decided to offer this to our photography community here at Clever Photographer. Now it's been very successful, and for the last 6 months we reviewed hundreds of photos from hundreds of photographers. For the same success, we had to limit the entries to 1 or 2 photos per week per photographer, and for the same reason, we always take the show and divide it between 2 or 3 parts. Depending on how many entries we get, we usually look at the landscape photographers in the first part and the rest of the photography teams in the rest of the show. Now before we're gonna jump into the reviewing, I have 2 things to remind you. The first one is to remember about our new Facebook photography group. It's called Clever Photographer Academy, and it's a place where we all meet together throughout the week. Now we review your photos throughout the week, we talk about photography, we answer your photography questions, and we also play photography competitions. So it's a lots of fun, we talk all things photography, so make sure you join us there. Just head to Facebook, search for Clever Photographer Academy and join us today. Now coming back to the photography review show, each of the episode has important features you can use to make the experience even better. Now remember about the chapters which you can find at the bottom of your screen, where you can navigate between the different parts and different reviews of the show. So if you submitted us your photos and you're looking for your own review, simply skip to the parts you're looking for by using the chapters. The second important part of the show are the subtitles. You can usually find them on the top or bottom of the video, and you can switch them on. That way you can understand more about what I'm talking about. Also, if you're looking for foreigner language, you can switch the subtitles to the language you require. Now, since we're done with all of this, now we are ready to jump into the show and start with the reviewing. And here we are with the first part of the show, where we're gonna be looking at landscape photographers. Now we have 21 landscape photographers to look at, so we're gonna have to go nice and fast, but it's gonna be a lots of fun anyway. Now before we start with Alan's photos here, I wanted to remind you to make sure that you like the video, comment under it, and also follow our YouTube channel so we can keep creating content like this. So let's jump into it. We are here in Lightroom CC again. This is what we use to basically review the images. Once again, we're looking at pictures from Alan, and we have 2 images from him, so let's have a look. So starting with the first impression, Alan, this one, I'm not 100% sure about the foreground, although I think composition-wise it works quite well. I think it's a little bit busy and makes the whole image quite overwhelming, so maybe we'll look at it a little bit in the composition part. Other than that, it's a lovely scene with the beautiful kind of drama in the sky, and in overall it's very pretty. Then looking at this one, again, very dramatic sky with a beautiful sunset or sunrise, and lots of greens in the foreground, which I think again is a little bit of a shame because it takes a little bit of the attention away. When you have such a dramatic sunset, you just wish you could kind of remove this and really focus directly on the sunset or sunrise itself. Anyway, talking about technical part of the image and coming back here, I can see that you're using Nikon camera, and your settings were ISO 250, 16 millimeters, f11, 1/500th of a second. So ISO 250, just as a reminder, always we're trying to go for as close as 100 ISO as possible. When you go above that, you start to introduce digital noise to the images, and obviously the higher you go, more of it comes over. Most of the time 250 is completely acceptable and it doesn't really do anything to the image. You can usually remove the noise easily in post-processing software, so not to worry about it. It's just a reminder for everyone that that's the golden goal. Of course, sometimes it also depends on the equipment you have. Some cameras only go to as far as 200 and so on. Anyway, so that's that. Other than that, technically, let's have a look. So obviously this part is very sharp. And that's where the F11 really helped to make sure that everything is sharp. Moving to the closer to these parts, they look still sharp to me, and pretty much all the way through, so well done there. With the 1/500th of the second, obviously it creates this kind of freezing moment where the waves just kind of stop, and I think that works pretty well as well, specifically for this scene. I think really kind of, as you are on the top, it is not as visible as if you would be from the bottom, and the waves would be a little bit distracting. I think in this case it actually creates really nice leading lines here, and it works. When we're talking about this image, again, ISO 200, f13, 1/240th of a second with your 24mm lens, or 18-55, but 24mm is what you use for this image. So nice and wild. Again, just with the ISO, as I was saying, the 100 is the goal, f13, and that way it gives you a little bit of these sun burst here, which I think is really nice. In overall, when capturing a sun, there are two kind of approaches generally used. One is to have the really defined sun when you can see sharp, when you can see a really sharp defined circle, golden circle, and the second option is to go for nice glow. You went for the glow, which I think is really nice. I like when the glow is really kind of gradient, and in this image it works quite well. I think the light race works very well too, so generally very well done. There is a little bit of noise, but that's with the dynamic range like this quite normal. Looking back at this one again, I didn't really check for noise. Again, there is a little bit of noise you can see mostly at the back, but nothing crazy. And I think in overall, technically, the images are actually very well done and well captured. So well done on that. And let's move to the composition. So talking about this image, when it comes to composition, I already mentioned that I'm not 100% sure about the foreground. First, I don't think it adds necessarily anything to the image. Second, it's something what we call high frequency texture. It's usually not the smartest to use it for a foreground because it makes the image very busy and overwhelming. So when you have this kind of grass and the trees and the leaves, sometimes it gets a bit overwhelming, and that could be the case here. What I would suggest to get a cleaner composition would be almost to kind of zoom in and crop it much tighter than that. So I would probably go for like little panorama crop and just get the beach and the best out of it. So maybe even something like this, and you can immediately see how the beach is your kind of main subject. That's where all the leading lines are, but that's where all the float is. I understand that you're losing the foreground this way, but really what I think is that it doesn't really add much to the image. When it comes to storytelling and subject, I think the beach is what you're trying to show, so that's what I would try to do there. And then moving on this image here, so again, similarly, I think the foreground is just a little bit busy. Obviously, I wish you could be somehow behind them, just capturing the water with the sun, maybe with the little island here. I think that would work so much better. It's not wrong, it's just a kind of suggestion on what could help, really. I think the sky is amazing. I think the water is great. These things just a little bit break down the composition. Again, also the combination of yellow, blue and green in this case just kind of breaks the overall feel of the image. So other than that, it's still beautiful capture of the sun and a beautiful moment anyway, with very nicely handled f-stop with the light race there. So well done anyway. Talking about post-processing, on this one I was already telling you about the cropping. I would do just a little bit differently. Other than that, I don't really have much to add this. It's kind of very natural edit. It looks very natural. Obviously, there could be a little, maybe like little vignetting added to the image just to bring the attention towards certain parts of the image. But other than that, I think it's very nicely done. So not much to add here. And on this one, I think it works quite well as well. What I would do, I would maybe darken the foreground a little bit just to keep it as silhouette. So you can do that in masking and using liner gradient and just kind of putting it like this. and bringing down the exposure over it. So maybe something like this to really bring the attention towards the sun and leave it that way. Other than that, beautiful colors, beautiful saturation. Alan, it's a beautiful capture. Both of them are, in fact, it's just a few kind of things and hints for maybe a next time. So thank you very much for sending us your photos, and I hope to see more of them in the future. Moving on the next photographer, we have Alex. Alex, I feel that I've seen your pictures before. Some of them, definitely, I recognize the name. So Alex, let's have a look at your images. So we have two images here. Both of them with very interesting white balance. So let's talk about it. First impression on this one, very lovely composition. Very kind of nice foreground, middle ground, background, really nice sky with a nice texture on it. So in overall, very pretty. I'm just not 100% sure about the white balance itself. I think there is a lot of pink really leaking through all the way, and it doesn't look very natural. So that's just a kind of first impression for me there. Here, it's much better. Love the glow at the back, but I would look at the geometry, just making sure that the bridge is straight, and I would maybe crop it just a little bit differently so we can look at that throughout the review. So starting with this image, Alex, technically, let's have a look if we have any details, and we do. So using Canon camera, you were using 24-105 lens. So the settings, ISO 400, 24 millimeters, f11, 1/500 of the second. So I'm assuming with 1/500 of a second, your bolts are nice and sharp, which is definitely the case. So well done there. With f11, you get the sharpness all the way through. So again, great. The ferry wheel is all sharp as well. I'm not sure if it was moving or not, but it's sharp as well. And in general, very nicely done. To be honest, with for ISO 400, I was expecting some noise, but I don't really see much. So either you done some post-processing or no, it's nicely handled. And in overall, I think technically this is very well done. I think what you done here really work. I think the fact that all the boats are frozen and sharp, and it's sharp all the way, it's very lovely. So well done there. Talking about this image right here, again, we're looking at the settings, ISO 100, the golden goal, 24 millimeter lens, so nice and wide, f9, which is perfect for this scene, and 1/160th of a second. Obviously, anytime I'm shooting subjects where I have something really close to me, like maybe this chain, I keen to go more towards f11, just to make sure that really the sharpness go all the way through. But in your case, looking at it, it seems like it worked anyway. It really depends. You just need to try and see. I think the golden kind of area for the lenses are anyway between f7 to f11. So f9 is perfectly fine, and it seems like it really worked all the way. Now, once again, just keep an eye on the geometry to make sure that everything kind of work out there and it's all nice and straight. Obviously, you can have a look at it in a geometry itself. Right here, when I'm in editing module, you can try the auto and see if that helps. And it helps a little bit. It would need a little bit of work on. Sometimes the guided works even better. So we can just kind of zoom in and use these lines to make sure that we are nice and straight. Have a look, maybe something like this. And that way we kind of end up straight on, and then we can do a little bit more cropping later on. So that's just a one thing. Talking about composition, I think this works really well, actually, you know. I'm not 100% sure if it needs as much of the sky, because I think specifically this part is just extra. But in overall, as an image, it works very, very nice. You just kind of think if you would leave this, I know it would become more panoramatic, but it's kind of stronger, more kind of composition with more impact. And that would be about it. I think these leading lines, the flow, the strong foreground, and then sharpness all the way with the lovely sky with the texture on it works super well here. So well done on that. Talking about this one, when it comes to composition, I see what you're trying to do with the kind of leading lines here. However, I think, to be honest, as they don't really lead towards there. I think if you would go over and just capture the bridge, it would maybe be even stronger composition. But in general, it's still very, very nice. I mean, just maybe I would crop a little bit of the sky again away, and not necessarily always, but just for the sake of it's just a blue gradient. So something like this, again, it's much stronger and it looks a little bit more powerful in overall. Now, as to be honest, when you crop it like this, as these parts becoming more dominant, it actually probably works even more. So in overall, Alex, this is what I would do with it. When it comes to post-processing, on this one, let's just quickly look at your white balance and let's see what Lightroom would suggest to us when we go to auto. And you see there is lots of blue going on. And obviously lots of pink, so I'm not 100% sure what the white balance is, why you're getting so much kind of pink and yellowish. If that's how it looked, maybe that's perfectly fine. It just seems on the first look a little bit unnatural for me. Other than that, I like the colors, I like the contrast, I like the shadow highlights, how you work with them, so well done there. On this one, there is absolutely nothing to add for me. I think the shadows are well done here, the contrast is done nicely, the saturation works, the golden feel works very well as well. So in overall, Alex, well done, great pictures. And if you have more, make sure you send them to us in the future. We can't wait to see them. Moving on, next we have Andres. Andres, one image this week. Obviously this kind of silhouette with the sunset or sunrise behind. So let's jump to it. Let's have a look if we have any information. And we have, so you use Fujifilm, ISO 160, f4, 1/150th of a second. ISO 160 is fine, f4 is fine, and the shutter speed is fine as well. To be honest, the silhouette actually really works here. I think it looks very, very cool. When it comes to the actual settings, I think it's well captured. Just only thing which kind of strikes me is the glow around the people. You get lots of kind of darker glow, and then you're getting kind of bright glow. So it's kind of different layers of the glow. And I just wonder how it was captured, why you're getting these. And it's definitely something you would want to look at in post-processing, maybe in a Photoshop, as this would be really visible on like a print, even though this could be very interesting print, obviously being super contrasty and interesting. I think this glow would not look as cool on the image itself. So just something to kind of think of for a future. When it comes to the composition, I think it's very smart. I think it's very powerful. My only thing is that I think it's way too big. I think I would definitely crop much more inside and maybe do just something like this. Obviously, again, if you would print this on a big frame, and now I lost you. If you would print this on a big frame, this would look very, very small. So I would definitely crop in and make sure that the main subjects, which are these silhouettes, are much more bigger than you had already. So something like this. When it comes to post-processing, I already mentioned I would be focusing on the glow and seeing how I can remove that to make sure that I can just get rid of it. Other than that, the idea is great. Technically, it's well done. So just kind of look at the post-processing and see what you could do there. Also, keep an eye on the noise, which is kind of really visible in the sky, but that could be simply from the fact that it's kind of smaller image. So just for the future, something to think of. Anyway, Andres, thank you very much for sending us your photos. Take care and send us more in the future. Moving on, next we have Anne-Marie. We have there one image here, and let's have a look at it. So from the kind of first impression, it's almost kind of wild. It's almost looking like on a moon or something with the trees and so on. Lots of editing, I assume, here. Let's even see if we have some details. And we have, so let's talk about it. And the first impression is that it's kind of quite heavily edited, which I assume it is. That's the kind of first impression. It's very powerful as a message. It's just probably sometimes when we do this kind of heavy edits, we need to try to stay as realistic as possible. There is a little bit of something poking here, which I'm not sure what it is. Then again, there is this kind of piece of branch, which is just kind of hanging in the air. there are some kind of different edits here and here. I have absolutely no problem with any edits at all, especially when they create powerful scene. But as always, you want to make sure that you keep it as realistic as possible to kind of make it work. So you're using Nikon camera, ISO 800, which is super high, to be honest. As I always say and already said at the beginning of the show, you want to stick with as close as 100 as possible. Obviously, anytime you go over the 100, you start to introduce a digital noise to the image. Depending on your gear, on your camera, more you add, more noise it will add. And eventually there is a point which really depends on your camera, where once you hit that point, you start to lose sharpness, colors, and there will be no software which will be able to remove that. So it's just something to think of in the future, as close as 100 as possible. F13 is quite high, depending what you kind of artistically trying to capture. We always try to stay between F7 to F11 for these kind of landscape moments like this. 1/500th of the second is fine. Again, depending what you were trying to capture. Maybe you could have gone a little bit slower to closer to 100, and then you could lower the ISO as well. But in overall, technically, there is not really that many mistakes. I mean, it's all sharp and it's good. So let's move to the composition. The composition is interesting. Obviously, there is a lots of this kind of trees, which creates the contrast and a foreground. Then you have the middle ground, and then you have the kind of back right there. And not much I can add here. And then the post-processing, I think that's the big one. That's where I would be really focusing on making sure that I remove all of these little mistakes, like the black here, the hanging branch, and the parts here. There is even there is a sensor dust here, which can be really easily removed. And if you need to see how to do it, there is a video in the description, and you can simply just go ahead and remove it in a few seconds. In overall, man, thank you very much for sending us your photos or photo. And if you have more, make sure you send them in the future. Moving on to the next photographer, we have a Boris. Boris, we have two images from you in very kind of monochrome style, almost kind of vignette style, with lots of noise added and very kind of rustic feel. So my first impression is I really like it. I love the composition. I think the black really works here on the track. The picture has a lovely flow. There is lovely contrast. I think it's well handled. There is a touch of too much noise for me. I think you just want to be careful there. Not noise grain. You just want to be careful there. I understand what you're trying to do to make it kind of grungy vintage style, but I would just keep an eye to make sure that it doesn't become too overwhelming. On this one, again, lovely framing with the two trees and the little bench at the back. I think your composition is spot on. So let's kind of talk about the images. Let's see if we have any details. And we do. So you're using Canon camera, 19-35 lens. And again, talking about your settings, ISO 800, 26mm, f6.3, 5-second exposure. It's an interesting setting for a scene like this. I wonder if you were, why did you go for such a long exposure? Maybe you were looking for a kind of movement of the clouds to capture that. And then if you going for the long exposure, you should be able to put your camera on a tripod, and then you can really easily bring down the ISO to 100 or as close as to it as possible, and let really the camera run as long as it needs. So that way you avoid the noise which comes with the high ISO. Yeah, I'm quite impressed that your trees are not really shaken and they are not blurry, so well done there. Everything else looks sharp and full of details, so quite good. On this one, there is no details about how it was captured. However, again, everything looked kind of sharp. We're starting to get a different glow throughout the image. So for example, here there are kind of white parts, and then you have a darker part. So just something to kind of keep an eye on. Again, similarly here, you get lots of white and black, and it creates a really nice atmosphere. It's just some parts you need to keep an eye on. Talking about composition, I already mentioned, I love this one. I think the flow is great here. I think the foreground created by the tree works really well. And then the trees themselves really create nice depth. So in overall, I think composition-wise, this is actually a great capture. Talking about this one, I love the crop, really kind of panoramic feel, which I think really helps. The 2-3 creating almost a frame into the scene, again adding really nice depth together with the bench. To be honest, I think the bench really helps here because it really creates kind of depth. You almost feel like you want to walk towards it. And in overall, I think the composition is also very nice here. You could say that you could crop it a little bit more towards this side to kind of really center the trees. But I think what you've done with it works as well. And it's really cool. So again, as I'm repeating myself, I think composition wise, you really have a good eye on. Just talking about post-processing at the end, I think what you're trying to do and the effect actually really works. I don't have much to add, really contrasty. Keep an eye on the shadows to make sure that you don't dark things completely way too much. It's always good to have a few details. Just like here, you can see some details of the tree. I think it really helps. It brings a texture. It brings a kind of local interest, and I think it just really helps overall to the image. Here as well, similarly, you see these parts specifically. I think it really helps when there is a little bit of the texture coming out, so it becomes more natural. Boris, thank you very much for sending us your photos. Make sure you send us more of them in the future, and take care. Moving on to the next photographer, we have Chip. Chip, we have how many pictures? So we have a before, after. Let's see what we have here. So we have one here, JPEG, and yep, that looks like before and after, and this looks like before and after. Excellent. So my favorite, long exposure, and this is where I kind of started. I absolutely loved this smooth water like this, really silky. And I think what you've done here, the fact that you have it as smooth and then you have so much sharpness in the foreground, I think it really works. Well done there. Excellent. Talking about this one here, a really nice reflection, obviously lots of foliage and trees. And this is the final result. Also very nice. The only thing is that it's missing a little bit of the contrast for me. I think there is lots of the same color, lots of same light. So in overall, when I'm looking at it, first thing is about what is the main subject. It's so similar that you're almost losing the idea of the reflection. So just something we can maybe look at in the post-processing itself. So talking about the settings, let's have a look. So you're using Pentax camera and 25 seconds, so lovely smooth water here. ISO 200, f16. So obviously, kind of depending on what you were doing, I think the setting is right. f16 is really high, but then I don't know what was your setup when it comes to tripod and so on. Still, I think it's really cool. Obviously, there is a sharpness all the way, which is really important with this photo. I think once you go for this really smooth water, you want to really make sure that the stones are sharp as much as it's possible, because that's really what create the natural contrast there. When it comes to this one, let's have a look at the settings again. ISO 100, f16, 1/400 of the second. ISO 100, great. f16, I can see you going for high f-stops. I wonder why. Maybe you can leave it in a comment for me, so I can kind of understand more for the future. 1/400 of a second. Again, since you are master in the long exposure, I wonder if you couldn't have used it here, because I think if you would have set up your tripod and maybe let it run for at least few seconds, you would get even more defined foreground and reflection. So even those little wrinkles would maybe disappear. Just something to try for the future. I know that it's not always possible. Maybe this was a trip where you didn't have a tripod with you, but still something to kind of try for the future. Composition. To be honest, I probably prefer when there is a little bit of these details. I think this is just way too tight, the crop. And I tell you why. If you would be focusing just on the stone itself, so let's say you completely crop it to something like this. then maybe it would work better. However, with the crop you did, let's just reset this. With the crop you did, you still have a very busy corners and edges of the image. So by cropping like this, it's not really saving anything, where this really creates kind of fairy tale view. So I think it would have actually really helped if you would have just keep it and crop it just a little bit to maybe more something like this. Let's see, and maybe like this. I would definitely maybe crop the stone on the bottom, and that's it. I think it creates kind of really fairy tale forest feel. This would be my crop. I have my foreground, my really main foreground, and I have a flow with the river, and then I have the background, which kind of makes it almost look magical. Where this works as well, I think, in a contrast, where I am a big fan of removing parts which are not important for the main story of the image. I think in this case you would not have a little bit of the forest because of the coloring and because of the saturation. I think it really adds something extra to the image itself. Obviously, then you could let's just kind of darken this a little bit, and you could definitely play around with the vignette and really brings the attention towards the water, because that is your main subject. But with a little bit of dodge and burn, I think you could really create lots of magic here and make it really cool. Something like this, and then suddenly you have really something special to look at. And this is a picture which could easily be printed, because I think it would really look good on a big print. Composition on this one, from the original to this, I think you done well. Let's see. I really like when you're using a reflection as a composition to try to kind of position it in the center of the image, because it makes really nice, nicely balanced composition. It makes it much more cleaner. I think you could crop a bit of it here, because coming back to the point where you don't really need all of it, I think something like this would work really well. And then I would do a little bit more in the post-processing. But the composition, it's really nice, it's clean, there's nothing extra there, and it's well done chip. Talking about post-processing, I think you have it spot on here. Keep an eye on your white balance. You're getting lots of blues here. So again, if I come back to this, usually what I do is I kind of zoom in on the water, go into the white balance, and I use the picker and I kind of go for the white on the water. And that usually brings me as close as to nature as possible. So you can see the kind of before and after. And then from here, I kind of just adjust whatever I need to adjust. So sometimes I go for a little bit more blue, a little bit more warmth. But in overall, I think this, compared to this, works just a little bit more. It makes me feel that it's a bit more natural. If you need to make more adjustments, you can obviously play in a color mixer and so on. But I think this looks pretty cool. Talking about this one and coming back again to the white balance, let's see what it would give us. So I think definitely not as cool, but not as hot. So something like this. Now you see before and after. Let's go back. So this is a before, and when we go to the auto and bring it back up, you see, let me see if I can do it. Show original. There you go. So before and after. So after I do the white balance, you see we get starting to get a little bit of the contrast here, because there is not as much yellow. So suddenly we're starting to see the main subject of the image, which is this. So the white balance can not only change the overall feel, but it can really help us with the balance, with the contrast as well. And this is where you would kind of move on with other things. Obviously, again, I would a little bit lower the exposure, and then use the masking and use the brush, make it a little smaller, and then use the exposure and really bring the brightness just on the trees here, and similarly on the trees here. So even a little bit more, and then create another mask, place it here, and then bring the exposure down and really work with the other parts. And then you suddenly starting to get something like this. Now let's see before, after. So I hope that you see what I'm trying to do. Basically, you're trying to just pick certain part of the image, and you kind of work in that. That's where the magic of the landscape photography is, really in the local adjustments. I think really that's where you see the difference between professional and non-professional. Lots of people apply the kind of overall editing. Yes, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but then you have to kind of step in and really apply your own artistic view and start to kind of apply different effects or different adjustments to different parts of the photo. And that can bring you something like this. And it makes it look just a little bit more interesting, I think, from my point of view. So again, kind of before. And so this is what I got from you, and this is after. And yes, you could again create another brush and add a little bit more warmth, and then go in and apply it to the actual trees if you like that kind of thing. And you can again apply it to the bottom. But again, we're just doing it locally, and we're keeping an eye to make sure that we still creating contrast, and we selecting and editing the object so we can clearly show the main hero of the scene, which are definitely the trees and their reflection. So Chip, I hope this was helpful. If it was, make sure you hit us the like button and leave us a comment under below so we can keep adding more of these shows in the future. Moving on, the next photographer, we have a David. David, one picture this week. So let's have a look at it. Let's see what we got when we zoom in. So kind of autumn field photo with the tree and a view of the river. So let's jump to the actual information about how you capture it. So Fujifilm 18 to 55 millimeters lens, ISO 800, f6.4, 1/320th of a second. So David, ISO 800 is super high, I think. I know it looks like it was maybe a little bit lower, a light situation, but I'm sure you could have gone a little bit lower and maybe keep the ISO closer to 100. As you know, I always say 100 is the golden spot. That's where you want to be. ISO 100. Anytime you go above, it start to create noise. It start to create things you don't want to see on your images. Let's just kind of zoom in and see if it did something to your image. It's a bit difficult to see from here, but anyway, that's the kind of goal there. f6.4 is fine. I prefer usually to stay between 7 and 11, specifically for these kind of scenes. And 1/320th of a second really depends on what you were trying to do. I don't know if you're using manual settings or aperture mode. It just kind of depends on what you were trying to shoot. So that's about it here. When it comes to other technical parts, it's a shame that it's kind of smaller image, because you see when I kind of zoom in, it started to look a little bit blurry. But I have to say that from the view like this, it looks sharp to me. There is lots of texture. With that kind of speed, obviously the water get kind of frozen, but it quite works. And there is a really nice light coming through as well. So well done there. Just kind of keeping an eye on the ISO is one of my points for your technical part of the image. When it comes to composition, I love the view. I love the colors. I love the edges. I think what you're trying to do with the frame in frame works. The only thing is that it's missing like a main hero. It's missing like your main subject. It's missing something where you look at it and you know what it's about. Here, I'm not 100% sure. Is it about the foliage and trees, or is it about the river? Is it about the leaves here? So I hope you know what I mean by it. It's a lovely scene with the kind of really autumn feel, but it's missing something where I look at it and say, okay, this is it. I don't know. It could be anything. Maybe if there would have been something on the actual river, or, so I think when you add lots of these kind of different elements, eventually you lose the idea of what it's been. It's like trying to tell 4 or 5 stories at the same time. So just for the future, something to think of. This is where we talk about the composition and the focal point. When you pick your focal point, your main subject, and then you build a scene around it. So just for the future. David, other than that, talking about post-processing, I think it's actually quite nicely done. I like the saturation. I like the colors. I think the highlights and shadows are done nicely here. Just keeping an eye on your whites. You see when I hit the whites here and when I hold Option or Alt in Lightroom, all these little white spots is basically where the picture is overexposed and you kind of losing details in them. So if you would want to go and print this picture, all these white spots would be kind of burned out, so it wouldn't look super cool on the image. But other than that, I think it's nicely done. Well done, David. Thank you very much for sending us your image. I would just kind of think about the composition next time. Other than that, I think you've done super well. Thank you very much. Moving on, we have Hilda. And Hilda sent us this picture right here. So let's have a look. What do we have? Is it the same image, just a raw file and afterwards? So Hilda, I love what you've done here. Already the original image is very, very cool. I'm a huge fan of the kind of forest, woodland photography. This looks super atmospheric already. And then what you've done here looks even cooler. Really kind of magic forest feel like. I think the composition is very nice here as well. So let's jump to it. Let's talk about it. Hilda, Nikon D700, ISO 200, 45 millimeters, f7.1, 1/160th of a second. Spot on settings, obviously, as we always say, keeping an eye on the ISO, but 200 is perfectly fine. Just as always, 100 is the goal. f7.1 is perfect for this scene. With that, while you will get everything sharp in foreground and you will get a little bit of the kind of blur towards the end, which generally really helps with creating a depth, specifically with this kind of scene. It would look very unnatural if you would have complete sharpness all the way through. So this is good choice. And 1/160th of a second, it really depends on the light you had when you were editing the image. In overall, I think technically it's very well done. Lovely light, very nice and diffused. And that's about it. Just kind of looking at the original picture, just kind of keeping an eye on your exposure would be my one reminder. See, when I am here on looking at the actual raw file and playing around with the whites, when I slide them all the way down, you can see that few parts. When I hit the white and hit option, you can see the few white parts on the top, and that's the parts when you were a little bit overexposed, but then in the post-processing they're not here, so I wouldn't worry about them too much. But just for the future, maybe try to kind of capture with bracketing, try to get one underexposed, one overexposed, so that way you always have a data to work with. So other than that, technically, well done. Composition-wise, I think from this to this, super cool. To be honest, I'm not 100% sure why you got reduce of the original crop, because I think the 2 trees on the side really works. I think it creates really nice edges, really nice frame-in-frame composition. So just for the future, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I think it would have worked as well. But this works fine as well. It's just that once you get this 1/2 crop tree here, and you don't get it on the other side, suddenly the composition is a little bit unbalanced. So that's just something to kind of think of. The rest is quite nice. You have a lovely eye for a composition, because to be honest, photographing woodlands is really tricky because lots happening there. So there is lots of elements. It's a kind of, when you walk through the forest, by looking at it, it looks nice, but once you start to photograph it, it gets really busy. It's really difficult to navigate the viewers through, and I think your photo really works here. Post-processing, well done. I love the overall feel. I love the moody feel, Hilda. Obviously, with the kind of fog effect and the darkness from the top and the light from the bottom. Well done. Nothing to add, Hilda. You've done super well. I love the before and after. I think it's super cool. So thank you very much for sending us your photo. And if you have more, send them in the future. We would love to see them. Moving on, the next photographer, we have a Jim Mitchell. Jim, we have 2 images from you. And one is kind of really cityscape crop in on a building, which is something I really, really like. I think it's very cleverly done with a tree in it, with a reflection. I think it really works very, very well. And then we have this kind of full-on city view with a river, lovely sky, and lovely foreground. So let's jump to it and let's have a look at the images. Starting with this one, sadly there is no details about how you capture it. The only thing is that it's a really, really small size. So you see, when I kind of just try to zoom in a little bit, it starts to look really pixelated. And when I zoom in a fair bit to see the sharpness, it almost looks like an old video game. So just as a reminder for next time, when you're gonna send us pictures, make sure that they are the highest quality possible, so that way we can give you a little bit more feedback. But from the kind of look from here, everything looks nice and sharp, including the buildings at the back, so that's very nice. You get quite nice diffuse light here as well, knowing that you have lots of blue sky above it, so well done there. The light is quite pleasing, and yeah, in overall, well done. Talking about this one and talking about the technical point of view, I think there's not much to add here. Again, very nice diffuse light, very nicely captured with the sharpness. Little bit more quality here when it comes to the quality of the JPEG, so well done. In overall, I think technically this one is again very well done. Moving on to composition, I really like this. I think it's really cool. Obviously, just kind of giving you advice for the future. There is nothing wrong with it, but I would keep an eye on the tree, because it's something which we call is kind of confusing foreground element. And that's the kind of elements which are kind of half crop, half cut. It can be trees, lampposts, cars, people, buildings, anything like that, when it's just kind of poking from a middle, and it's so, if there would be 15 trees cut halfway, it wouldn't be so significant, but once you get one, it starts to be a little bit visible. I know that there is not much you could do. Still, it's a lovely photo, but if the tree wouldn't be here, it would have been even better. So it's just a note. It's not that it's wrong, but if you would be looking at a way how you could improve it, this is the way I would do it. Other than that, I think the scene is beautiful. I love the kind of flow to it. I love how you position the buildings. I think the foreground with the grass and the middle background with the river and the building really works, Jim, and you have a great eye for composition. When it comes to composition, I think this is super smart. It's very well done. When you're photographing something like this, it really has to be really well balanced. So to make sure that everything, you could almost run a line in the middle, and the building would kind of split half on equal parts, which is really important here. And the sky and the tree really works here as well. So in overall, Jim, this is very well done. Love it. Talking about post-processing, not much to add here. Very kind of natural white balance, lovely work with your highlights, shadows. The exposure is well done as well here. You could add a little vignette just to kind of bring the viewer's eyes inside of the image to do something like this, but other than that, well done. Talking about this one, again, you could bring a little bit more attention towards the center by using masking tool, so maybe like a radial tool, and position it in the middle, and just bring a little bit of exposure in the center or different parts of the image. But that's about it. Again, you could use the vignette to add a little bit more attention towards the center. But other than that, Jim, they are two great captures. I'm really happy what I'm seeing. Well done. If you have more pictures, make sure you send them to us in the future. And if you haven't joined us yet, make sure you head to the Facebook, look for Clever Photographer Academy, and come to join us there, because we would love to see more of your pictures more regularly. So moving on to the next photographer, we have a Laurence. So let's look at your picture, Laurence. So Laurence, we have a picture right here of this kind of it looks like a fortress or something with the water in front. Just from the kind of first impression, I love the flow. I love the kind of leading line created by the shore, and then the fortress itself, and then interesting dramatic sky. So in overall, very nice. Let's have a look if we have any details of the image. Yes, so starting from the technical point of view, ISO 160, which is perfectly fine. F4, it's quite low for a scene like this, and this is why you get a little bit of a blur here, obviously by focusing on the fortress. I would go probably somewhere about F7, F8. 1/400 of a second is good as well. Again, you could have a tripod and maybe go for long exposure and get a little bit more movement captured on the actual sea rather than this frozen moment, but that would be just another approach in overall. So other than that, I think your setting is good. I like the sharpness. I like the sharpness all the way through. That is touch of grain in the sky and around, but it's in overall, I think it's fine, and it's lovely. Composition, absolutely nothing to add, spot on. Loving the flow and the leading line created by the shore, leading you straight into the fortress. I think it just looks very cool, and it's really well handled here. When it comes to post-processing, I would keep an eye on the white balance, and I think it's to do a little bit with the fact that obviously the sky and the light probably wasn't that interesting. Everything is a little bit equally lit, which is where you kind of losing the contrast a little bit. And this is the type of image which also usually works really well in black and white, because suddenly you're using the kind of flatness of the light, and you can really work on with just the different contrast between black and white. So then you can really go into the brush and maybe add more kind of brightness into the leading line right here. And then you can again bring a little bit of brightness into the fortress to again highlight the main subject. And then you can add another brush and work around. Brush. Exposure down. For some reason it doesn't work. Yep. So something more like this. Obviously not that strong, but something like this would be something also you could do with this. So different ways how to work with this. Again, you could add another linear gradient at the top and create even more contrast in the sky, and similarly add another one and add one from the bottom. That's just for the kind of black and white vision here, but even your capture looks very cool. Just, you know, sometimes you at the place with incredible light, sometimes you there with just kind of different things, but I still think in overall, Laurence, it's a lovely picture. Again, the composition is spot on, and still the editing and technically it's also very well done. So thank you very much for sending us your image. If you have more of them, make sure you send them to us in the future. And moving on, the next photographer, we have a Michael. Michael, we have two images from you, so let's jump to it. So first one right here, just kind of talking about the first impression. Absolutely love this one. I love the kind of composition, beautiful long exposure sky with lovely texture and lovely colors, so well done there. And then talking about this image right here, a little bit more atmospheric. Again, long exposure on the sky with lots of texture and different light. And then kind of foreground here with the different kind of marks. When I kind of zoom in, obviously those are birds, but with a long exposure, they are a little bit half disappeared, but they still a little bit visible there. But still lovely capture, a little bit of sensor dust here, so something we can kind of talk about in a moment. So let's jump to it. Starting with the kind of technical part of your images, this one using Nikon camera, 14 millimeters, ISO 100, f13, 60-second exposure. Wow. ISO 100, great. f13, obviously kind of pushing really the shutter speed as long as possible. Absolutely love the long exposure in a contrast with lots of details on the foreground. So very well done there. Again, a lovely texture in the sky, which really works with the long exposure on the top as well. So well done. Just well done there. I think the light is great, nice and diffuse with the glow coming from the side here. Super cool. Talking about this one, again, your settings, different lens, 28 to 300, ISO 100, so f14, again, 60-second there. It's interesting that even with the 60-second, the birds didn't completely disappear. Sometimes it happens, they just don't move enough, it seems to, but still very interesting kind of landscape panorama. And technically, I think it's quite well done. Still quite nice text, quite nice sharpness to it. Not 100% the most exciting light ever, but still it creates really nice kind of blue over feel to it. And I think technically it's still very well done with lots of kind of smoothness in the sky. Just one thing I would keep an eye again is the sensor dust, which is kind of visible here. And again, when you go with your f-stop high, when you hit the kind of F14, F16, F20, these things really start to pop out. There is a video in the description where you can see how you can remove really easily the sensor dust in Lightroom, but there is just this kind of healing brush which you can use, and you can switch on this visualizing spot, and you can see some of the spots right away, and it really takes just a few seconds to remove them. As you can see, it's just a few clicks right here and here, and it usually kind of helps really quickly to remove some of these to make sure that you get a radius of them. So right away, just like this, you can see they kind of gone, and it doesn't take even a few seconds. Talking about composition, this one I love. I think it's great. I think the kind of line with the leading line and flow created by these pillars, I think it works really well. It's not 100% balanced, obviously, with these being much higher than this staying open. It's weighting a little bit towards this side, but it doesn't matter. I think it's still very, very cool and very smartly done. You could probably have zoom in a little bit more to kind of avoid at least the biggest part, that then you would lose the glow, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. I think still it's a lovely picture and a great composition. On this one, when it comes to composition, I think the foreground works really well here. It adds a nice depth to the image itself. I think there are parts which maybe wouldn't necessarily need to be there. I think there's a bit too much of a sky for me there, especially at this part when you get to the point when it's just the same thing. So I would probably bring it a little bit down. Then again, this part of the city doesn't really add anything to the overall composition, so I would just cut it a little bit. Maybe not, maybe this much, and just maybe keep it like this. And I think you get a little bit more powerful message there, where you're really kind of focusing on the city, and it's starting to, even the foreground starting to work a little bit more because it's a bit more dominant, and suddenly the composition, it's much more kind of gradient, where here and here you just get lots of empty spaces, which we always suggest to if it doesn't add anything to the overall story what you're trying to tell, it doesn't help. And I think in overall the story is your cityscape, your kind of seaside, and a little bit of the long exposure sky. So again, for me, I would be going with framing more towards something like this, where you get much kind of stronger, simpler message. Talking about post-processing on this one, absolutely nothing to add. I think it's well done, and the white balance is great, nice and warm. The shadows and highlights really work here, not too much of either or. The contrast is lovely, and it's just very well done. On this one, again, the light wasn't probably the most interesting. Keeping an eye on the white balance. This was probably more towards how it looked. So I would just keep an eye on too much of the blue, and maybe just keeping it to something like this. And working with a little bit of more contrast, maybe just generally on some of the areas. And then just closing the picture a little bit more by using the masking. So you can use the linear gradient and bring it down the exposure there. So maybe just something like this, and do something similar from the bottom. So something like this, to really bring the attention towards the center of the image. But in overall, Michael, I think they are great two pictures. Obviously, this one is kind of more your panoramatic, full-on big scene, where this one is a little bit more cropped in, but even more powerful. In overall, Michael, I love the pictures. Thank you very much for sending them over. And if you have more of them, make sure you send them to us in the future. Moving on, the next photographer, we have a Mike Bruce. Mike, we have two images from you, and they one is from the kind of interior of some kind of monastery or older building, and this is kind of overall view over the rooftops. Both of them are very lovely, so let's look at them. Talking about the first impression, this one, it's a very kind of nice corner somewhere. I just think that it's a shame that you're missing this part of the image. Keeping an eye on the edges is really important. Trying not to cut pieces of things, and especially when the palm or the flower or the plant is really kind of dominant part of the image, you want to keep it in as much as possible. Once you start to crop it, just start to look a little bit unnatural. Moving on this one, I think it's really nice as well. A lovely contrast, very kind of interesting. There is a lovely background with the sky with a little bit of texture in it, so that works quite well as well. And in overall, it's quite lovely. I quite like this one, Mike. So let's have a look at your images in a little bit more details. Looking at your settings, so you're using Fujifilm. I wonder if this is a mobile phone, maybe. If not, there's not much details about the lens. Anyway, ISO 200, which in this kind of settings with this light is probably fine. f2.8 is really low, and that's where you get the kind of different blurs at different part of the images, but it's still good. 125th of second of shutter speed is good as well. There is a really nice sharpness to it. You get details even in the dark parts of the image, and the light is quite nice and diffused. So in overall, technically, quite nicely done. Not much I can add here. Talking about this one, there are no details about how you capture it, which is a shame. I would keep an eye on your exposure. I think if I go to white and I hit Option or Alt, you see everything what's not black is a little bit overexposed, and it's pure white and it's kind of losing the colors. If I shift it down, when I bring it all the way down, this is the white part is really where the data is lost. So it was overexposed, and basically if you would print it, it would be just pure white. So it's just something to kind of keep an eye in the future. Anytime there is lots of white like this, it could be also snow or white buildings, you really want to make sure that you keep an eye on your exposure. And generally for the scene like this, I would underexpose at least one stop and then just kind of work around with it in the post-processing so I can make sure that I get all the details out of it. So that's just about the technical part. Talking about composition on this one, I think you're a little bit too tight with the crop. I think if there would be at least part of the pillar here, it would help. And definitely I already mentioned about the flower. If the flower either isn't there or if it would be all there, I think it would help as well. Sometimes, of course, you cannot keep everything in the frame itself, but when it's so dominant on the picture, this is your like one of your main elements. You really want to make sure the whole flower stays in the frame. So that would be it. Otherwise, it's a kind of lovely romantic corner, little bit of kind of your kind of vintage view, and it kind of works nice with a little bit of shadows in it. So it's lovely. Just those kind of notes for the future. On this one, when it comes to composition, I think it's a shame for this half-cut tree here again. As you can see, these are the kind of things which we don't recognize when we kind of pull the pictures into the computer. But once you would print it, this would be really dominant on a print. So just something to kind of keep an eye on. I would probably even try to crop it off and maybe go again for more kind of panoramic view. So maybe something like this. It's still as much powerful, but you're losing a little bit of the distraction down there. And then you bring in more of the story on the rooftops, including this like a church top and the background. So this would be what I would do with it. When it comes to composition, I would crop the bottom, which really doesn't add that much to it, and stay with something like this. Moving on to post-processing. So on this one, even though the light is diffused, there is not much of interesting light really here. Obviously, you could play around with a little bit of the local adjustments. Also in black and white, I think it would look very nice here with a little bit of a help of brush. You could just kind of brush exposure in different parts of the image and just make it a little bit more interesting. Maybe not as much, but maybe something like this, and add another one and actually go with exposure the other way, and then maybe add a little bit of a contrast in different parts of the image, and then go and push the contrast, and you could get something like this, and it could be really interesting as well. So just something different to try, especially when the light isn't crazy interesting and it doesn't really create some kind of shadows and so on. So something different to try before, after, just for the future. And then Mike, on this one, when it comes to post-processing, just keeping an eye on the whites again. So I would bring down a little bit of the highlights and obviously bring the whites down, maybe to something like this, just to make sure that I keep the details on the actual image. I will bring the exposure down in overall, and again, do exactly the same with the brushing and with adding a little bit of the exposure I would highlight some of these areas and maybe more here, and then make another one and actually brush a little bit of the contrast in it. So you get something a little bit more contrasty. Again, the colors, I'm not sure why, but they are a little bit washed out. So let's see if we would check your white balance, and it doesn't really make much difference, so we don't worry about that. Maybe a little bit of vibrance to add some of the colors, and that's about it. Maybe in effects, a little vignette to bring more attention towards the center. And in overall, Mike, I think they are both lovely pictures, just a kind of different thing, both of them, but still well done. Thank you very much for sending them over. And if you have more, make sure you send them to us in the future. Moving on to the next photographer, we have Mr. Dreamer. Mr. Dreamer, we have 2 images from you. Epic skies with a lovely kind of sun coming through the portal here. And then this one with either drone or standing on the top with beautiful sun there. Lots of golden glow and everything. So let's jump to it. Let's have a look at the settings. So starting here, obviously ISO 100, 14mm, f18, 1/8 of a second. So ISO 100, of course, fine. F18, I wonder why you were going for so high ISO, maybe trying to bring down the shutter speed. Not 100% sure. It just seems very high. Obviously, I know there are some kind of foreground elements here, but the scene doesn't seem to be so complex that you would have to go for such a high f-stop. The f-stop, the shutter speed 1/8 of the second helped a little bit with a little bit of a smoothness of the water, and then maybe the f18 help you to do this kind of ray. If you want to kind of send me maybe write down in a comment of why you went for the f18, what was the thought behind, that would be great, so then I can kind of understand what you were trying to do. Of course, the sky is absolutely epic. There is a sharpness all the way through. I think it really works. There is a little bit of almost kind of golden haze going over these elements. And other than that, I think it's very well done. I think you have lots of details and texture in the sky. You have this kind of glow coming through the actual rock. The sun hidden behind the rock works really well. Lots of details as well. Nice movement in the sea. And overall, well done. Talking about this one, again, we're looking at the settings. ISO 100, f4, 2/5 of the second. Now, if I have to choose between 2 of them, I prefer this one. I think your sun got really I think there are 2 ways to capture sun. One is to have really defined circle of a sun, and the second one is to have a glow around it. And in your case, I don't know if the sun was maybe so strong, you're kind of getting a little bit of a both with lots of light leak here. So it's just taking lots of attention away from the rest of the image. If I go into the light and I hit the whites with my Option Alt key, I'm 100% sure the sun is a little bit burned out. So it means that there is not that much details in the center. And as kind of composition goes, human eyes get attracted by the brightest and whitest spot on the picture first. So obviously when you look at this, first of all, your eyes immediately go into the circle, and everything else afterwards. So it's just, it's super complex picture with lots of yellow leaks all over the image. So obviously shooting straight into it is a great idea, but I don't know if it 100% work in this case. I think this was a much better idea, and I think it creates ultimately a better scene. Talking about composition, obviously this is great. The only thing is, when it comes to balance itself, it's not 100% balance. And I'm sure you know why, because there's this big rock on the side. Nothing you can do about it other than that you could probably crop it a little bit and see if maybe you could have created more something like this. Now it again looks a little bit like it's not actually in the center, but that's just to show you what I'm kind of talking about. Obviously, when you get something like this, it's a little bit more balanced. There is still a little bit of rock here, but it's not as dominant. You can also push a little bit more space here and make it just bit more balance in overall. So I think this would have been a little bit more balanced framing, but still I think the rock is great. I think the light leak works. I think these foreground elements, although it's almost on the edge of being a little bit too busy, I think they work. I think again you could have pushed the framing in overall a little bit further to maybe something like this, just to kind of keep it more manageable for the viewer. When it comes to this one, I think the composition, I totally get what you're trying to do. The sun in this kind of shape, but I think it gets really distracting with that amount of the sun. I already talked about it a lot moment ago, so we don't have to go through it. Post-processing, I think this one is spot on. It's really kind of dramatic and really saturated, so obviously it's full on. I know it will not be everyone's style, but me, I love it. I think it really works well here, so the way you done it, I think works. So well done in overall. There's lots of drama, lots of saturation, nice glow. I think well done here. The only thing is I would keep an eye on these parts. I think this one is way too bright for the sun being there. I think the rock from this side should be more of this color. But other than that, I think it's cool. Talking about this one, so keep an eye on the details in the sun. I don't know if we would have shifted down, maybe bringing down the highlights a little bit. Yeah, that helps a little bit. So maybe something like this. Again, the cropping could have been a bit different to really focusing just on the main scene. So maybe something more like this. This would be maybe something what you could go for. And definitely keep an eye on all the yellows. So the white balance looks really, really kind of yellowy. So I would probably push down the blues. And you see how we get a little bit of blues in these areas. And suddenly we're getting a little bit more contrast where here everything is yellow. So if I push down the temperature, suddenly I'm getting just a little bit of the blue tint. And I think it helps in overall the whole image. I think a little bit of the local adjustments with maybe just brushing and maybe cooling down and actually darkening some parts of it. But I think that would help as well, just to kind of create a little bit more contrast. But in overall, thank you so much for sending us those images. If you want, make sure you come and join us in our Facebook group, Clever Photographer Academy, or send us more pictures in the future. Moving on to the next photographer, Peter Simon. Peter, 2 images from you, both black and white. So let's talk about it. First, really, really lovely capture of the busy street, which actually I'm not a huge fan of having people in an image when it comes to kind of cityscape, but when it's done smart way, like you done it here, I think it really works. I think it adds depth of field. They all sharp, which is also really important. And I think in overall, this is actually a very, very lovely photo. Where this one is a little bit different. Obviously, we get some kind of trees on a really, really dark subject with a little bit of a yellow tint. So I think maybe that's where I'm a little bit losing the whole idea. I think if it would be black and white, I think it would work a little bit better, where it would keep it a little bit more natural. Let's just kind of reset it and we'll come back to it in a moment. Talking about this one, let's look if we have any details. So you're using Nikon, ISO 200, f9, 1/250th of a second. The setting is spot on, all good there. 250th of a second to get a nice sharpness on the people, and the contrast of the people in black and everything else being kind of brighter and white really works here. Everything is sharp, the light is quite nice, obviously coming from here. Still very, very cool. So technically very well handled. On this one, ISO 200, f7.1, 1/1000 of a second. Obviously really fast shutter speed, which I'm not sure what was the idea about. If you want to tell me about why you went for such a high shutter speed, make sure you leave it in a comment so I can kind of understand more about what you were trying to do. F-stop 7.1 is good for this situation. ISO 200, again, as always, as close as 100 is the idea, but still very well done here. Talking about composition, I think this really works. Really nice flow. Lovely kind of different elements, framing, flow, everything works here, so nothing much I can add to it. On this one, I'm not really 100% sure what the idea is, and I think it's to do a lot with the darkness. Again, I think black and white would maybe work a little bit better here. I think the trees, if they are your main subject, I would make sure that I don't crop them too much. That's what it is. I mean, it's not that you can't crop trees, obviously sometimes you have to, but when they are the main subject, the main kind of story, you really want to make sure that you capture all of them and you avoid these kind of cuts on the edges. Talking about post-processing, on this one I would have totally go for black and white because it makes it just much more simpler. Also, from what I can see when I open up a shadows a little bit, keep an eye on your sensor dust. It can be really easily removed by using the healing brush, so you can just really one-click thing and it's taken care of. If you want to see the full tutorial on how it's done, just head into this description of the video and there is a full video on it. So just like this, and that helped with that. And that's about it. That's what I would do with this one really. I would probably turn it to black and white to get rid of the yellow, and maybe push the whites a little bit. So I would just kind of do something like this to create even more contrast. You can push the blacks as well, and I would leave it with this. On this one, I would maybe add a little bit of the vignette just to create kind of view inside. But overall, I think it's really well handled, very well done. And this is probably one of the nicest black and white I've seen for quite some time. So well done, Peter. Love to see it. And if you have more pictures, make sure you send them to us in the future. Moving on, the next photographer, we have a Rajneesh. Rajneesh, I'm sorry if I'm reading your name wrong. Sometimes the names are a little bit foreigner for me, so sorry for that. However, let's have a look at your images. So, landscape, portrait, landscape. Usually we try to review only 1 to 2 images, so let's see what we're gonna have a look at. This one definitely. We can have a look at this one. This one, to be honest, is way too dark. With that much of a black, everything becomes super contrasty. So we leave this one for next time. If you want us to review it, make sure you send it back for next week and we can review it for you. Now, talking about this image right here, let's talk about it. So starting by looking at your camera settings, ISO 100, which is spot on, f5.0, 1258 of a second. So obviously ISO fine, f-stop f5. Yeah, I would have gone a little bit higher, but then obviously you were going for really fast shutter speed to make sure all the birds are sharp. So well done there. Looking at it now from another kind of view, it seems like you maybe done some sky replacement here. If you haven't, the f5 makes your end of the building a little bit blurry. Another thing which is a little bit shame on the kind of framing is that the building is actually tilting towards there, but we're gonna talk about that in composition in a moment. Talking about this one, let's have a look at your setting. Again, ISO 100 is spot on, that's the idea. F5, if you were focusing on your main subject, I think works. 1/400 of a second works as well. Nice texture in the sky, nice reflection. I think the setting here and technically it's nice done. A little bit of a harsh light coming, creating lots of contrast, but still there is not that much of it. So in overall, well done. Talking about composition, so definitely one thing I wish you would have stepped back a little bit more and actually try to get the full building in to make sure that then you can go into geometry, click on auto, and you can really get it straight. Obviously, it's not going to work here because the building isn't straight, but it's just one thing. Also, I think this element here adds a little bit of a distraction to the overall view, but still, you know what? It's an epic building, and it works. You're missing a little bit of the bottom. So I think overall you're a little bit too close, Rajesh. I wish you would have stepped a little bit back and get much more of it. When I'm photographing something like this, where I'm not sure if the geometry will work or if I'm gonna miss something, I always make sure that I photograph it with plenty space around so I can work with it later on. Obviously, with the latest cameras, it's not an issue that you're gonna do some croppings. The quality will stay same and you can do so much more here. So just kind of for the future. For here, composition, obviously your main subject is here. Nice reflection. I think this one is kind of well done, really, you know, nothing much to add here. The storytelling is here as well. The person is pointing towards the right direction. Well done here, well done. Post-processing. Now, I don't know if there was a sky replacement done here or no, but I would keep an eye definitely on the sky just to make sure that it all kind of works. But maybe no, maybe that's the original one. It's kind of hard to say. And when it's hard to say, that's a good thing. So, well done here. Let's have a look at your white balance. So just a little bit more of the warmth, I think, would help as well. A little bit of the tint would help as well. A little bit of a contrast, I think, would help as well, just to kind of create more of a texture on the building itself. And that's about it, you know. I think it works like this as well. Talking about this one, I think the light isn't greatest neither, together with the contrast. So I would bring the exposure down a little, open up a little bit more of the shadows, and then maybe again check your whites, check your black. Obviously, when I'm looking at the whites, you can see some parts of the image are a little bit overexposed. So next time, just kind of keeping an eye on that. And maybe I would add a little bit of a vignette to guide the kind of photographer's view in the center of the image. Other than that, Rajneesh, thank you very much for sending us your photos. If you have more of them, make sure you send them in the future. Moving on the next photographer, we have a Sabine. Sabine, how unusual to see you in a landscape photography section of the show. Anyway, absolutely stunning image. I'm very, very happy to see what you've done here. So let's talk about it. Beautiful flow, beautiful leading line. Lovely texture at the back, a little bit of noise, and a little bit of blur here on the side, which I wonder what it's from. So let's have a look at it. Let's have a look at your settings. Oh, no settings. That's a shame, because other than that, I think it's great. So let's talk about it. Technically, kind of looking at it like this, it looks all sharp except this part of the image. So I wonder what f-stop you were using. For a scene like this, I would go again somewhere between 7 to 11. And I think this one, f7 would have been perfectly fine. Having set my focus on the trees, it would create a really nice kind of balance in between, and I think it would work quite well. When I zoom in on the actual sky, I see a fair bit of noise. So again, it would be interesting to know what was your ISO. And also, I wonder, where is this shadow coming from? What was there, if maybe more trees or whatever. But when we move to the composition, I absolutely love it. I love the colors. I love the tones. I love the flow. I love the balance of the composition with the trees. The one brown tree actually creates really nice, interesting point, and it kind of breaks up the scene a little bit. So I think that works really well as well. And in overall, I think composition wise, this is absolutely spot on. There is just enough of the sky to keep it interesting, and well done. Talking about post-processing, to be honest, there is not much I would do to it. Yes, you could have a look if you could maybe add a little bit of sharpness to this part. You could have a look if you could remove some of the noise. But other than maybe adding a little bit of a contrast, just to kind of highlight some of the darks in it, and maybe even adding a little bit of the exposure to make it even brighter, I would leave it. I think it's super cool. I think actually, if you would have a look and try to see if you could fix this little bit of the, not blur, softness, I would even print it on like a card or print. I think it would look super cool. I think these kind of picture really works when you print them, because there is this kind of nice watercolor tones with the main kind of contrasty subject in the center. It's just super cool something. So well done for trying. I can see winter has hit Germany, so well done, and keep sending us more photos. Moving on, next photographer, Sandy. Sandy, we have 2 images from you. Where are we? Here. Sandy, probably from some kind of gardens with a lovely purple flower. So let's talk about it. This one I love. Now, if you would go to my Instagram, you would see I have several of similar of the images. Lovely storytelling here. The open doors in the gardens just really, really work. The composition is great. There is nice light coming in with the leading line with the it just works. Well done, Sandy. Really, really like this one. This one, just because this is kind of hiding a little bit of the it's not really a river or creek or the kind of form of water. I think that just takes a little bit away from the overall feeling. I think if you would have stepped a little bit closer, which probably wasn't possible, it would have been even cleaner. Still is a lovely, lovely image, but when you put two of them next to each other, this one is much stronger composition-wise. But still, very nice colors, creating a really nice contrast between the green and the purple, and it's a lovely photo. So let's talk about the technical part of them. Looking at your settings, so Sony A7R3, lovely, lovely camera, 16-35, ISO 100, so spot on settings there, f10, with that many elements, yep, good settings there as well, 1/30th of a second, with Sony A7R3, probably no problem with handshake there anyway, but just keeping an eye, usually around the 1/50th of a second, that's where you start to look for maybe monopod or tripod to make sure that your camera is steady on. What I'm seeing is everything sharp all the way through, which I think is really important here. Quite nice light. Obviously you get a little bit of the shadows here, but they are still quite soft, so I assume maybe the sun was kind of not as high on the sky neither. It creates nice actually color here in this tree as well, so in overall very, very well done. Technically I think this one is very well handled. Looking at this picture, the setting is almost same, ISO 100, f13, 1/30th of a second, so a little bit even higher f-stop than before. 35 millimeters, 16-35, really wide lens here as well, so kind of going the other way around, and this is maybe why the creek seems to be really small compared to everything else, is because you have quite wide lens on this one, but still lovely, lovely image. I think again the sharpness is there, lots of sharpness here in the foreground, all the way through. Obviously with that much that high f-stop, there will be sharpness all the way through. I wonder what you are focusing on, and seems to be maybe the foreground here, but still technically it's very well done. There is still even some texture visible through the trees, so well done there. Talking about composition, this one is spot on, absolutely zero to add. This one I could even use as an example for the students. So first of all, leading line created by the path and by the borders of the path, spot on. Frame in frame, composition using the doors open just enough so you can see them, so the brain can process it and can understand what is it looking at. And then even better, at the back is another tree, creating and really pushing the frame in frame through. Depth of field created with the doors and with the wall. You're just really hitting one by one by one. When you put them all together, it works. So composition, spot on, 100%. Talking about this one, composition wise, not as clear. I think maybe because there is a lot happening, I would maybe crop it a little bit differently. We're talking about this part, which is not 100% really needed there. So again, coming to the point when you just need to take off parts which are not important for the main message. So let's see if we would do something like this. I think that would help. You kind of need to look at the image and really decide what is it you want to show. Now, this is really important part because it's your main leading line through the image. Now, this is why I'm saying that if you would be in front of it and this would be bit more visible, not hidden behind, it would be a little bit stronger. But I think this is a little bit stronger composition than before. Let's see before and after when we crop it. So this is you and this probably would be me, just to kind of work with that, and that's about it. So still very lovely. It has a, so here we're talking about leading line, frame in frame, focal point, depth of field. Here we have a leading line and no frame in frame. There is not really focal point. You can't really say what's the main subject. So you kind of see how you increase or decrease the composition impact. And it's not necessarily that every picture needs to have all of them. It's just when you put them next to each other, obviously it's like putting them on a scale. One will go up and one will go down. Still very, very lovely. What I like as a composition is the contrast of the colors, which I think works very well here. Talking about post-processing, again, nothing to add here. Yes, you could add a little bit of a vignette, but there probably has been some already. You could maybe make the actual part here a little bit brighter if you would want to. Again, just adding a little bit more of the contrast, and that's about it. Spot on. Talking about this one, you could work here a little bit more with the overall kind of feel. You could again add a little bit of the vignette and use the brush to maybe make the kind of leading line a little bit more visible. Do something like this, and yes, you could close the image from the top by adding another linear gradient and do something like this, and again another one from the bottom, something. It's still very, very lovely. Keeping an eye on the white balance. When there is so much green, sometimes it's keen to push the green everywhere. So when you do something like this, just maybe not as much, but a little bit like this, and with a little bit of vibrance, I think it's still beautiful. Sandy, thank you very much for sending us your photos. It's always lovely to see them. If you have more, make sure you send them. I can't wait to see them in the upcoming episodes. So moving on to the next photographer, Stacy. Stacy, we have 2 images from you. Let's have a look at them. So first of all, starting here, some kind of autumn scene with lots of kind of lovely autumn colors, sun coming from a side. Nice. We get a little bit of a kind of softness in the foreground, and the sun, you're looking at a kind of golden color on the trees, and this has an almost white color. So I wonder if you added these light rays later in the post-processing, I would probably add a little bit more warmth to them in the next time. But still, a lovely scene. The trees are interesting. We'll talk about it a little bit more in a moment. Looking at this one, again, a very, very nice scene. Looking around, the palm tree, you know, when I look at it, I'm trying to figure out what is the main subject, what is the image about. So you have the palm tree, which is really kind of hidden in a corner, and then you have another tree which is here, and it looks a little bit soft for me. You see when I zoom in, and it's cropped off. So I would probably crop the whole tree away and just really focus on a palm tree and the rock at the back, and I would keep that as my main subject. But again, we look at it in a moment. So starting here, let's have a look if we have any details about how it was captured. And sadly, we don't have Stacy. That's a shame. Let's have a look at this one. No details neither. So let's talk about it. Technically, it's a little bit small. So you see when I zoom in to look for the sharpness, it kind of start to be really pixelated. But it's a little bit soft in overall, it feels like. I think the light is quite nice. It's nice and diffused. This light works quite nicely here as well. Just it should be a little bit warmer from the overall feel. I like the depth of the field created by, you know, a little bit of kind of softness here and the trees being sharp, and then the kind of darkness at the back. Stacy, I think technically it's quite okay. It's just the softness where I'm a little bit confused. Looking at this one, again, the tree seems to be a little bit soft, where the palm tree seems to be in focus, so that works quite well. Lots of harsh shadows here, which makes it really kind of contrasty. So again, something to kind of look at. Maybe it wasn't the best time of the day to photograph it, but still, from what I can see, again, kind of smaller image. Let's see if we can zoom in. Again, it seems a little bit soft for me, not 100% sharp. It's really a shame that there are no details about how you photograph it, because then we can really kind of help you, tell you what you could do differently next time. When it comes to composition, not much I can add here actually. It's very interesting. It's kind of autumn, colorful scene, full of different colors. and I think it works. Keep an eye on the edges, making sure that you don't cut any of it away. In overall, Stacy, I think it's a lovely, lovely capture. I think composition-wise, it's nice. I like the different colors. I like how the trees add the depth. Well done. Talking about this one, I think this is where I would do a different framing. I would get reduce of this in overall and probably really just focus on something like this. So then suddenly the palm tree becoming our main subject with the background of the rock, and suddenly it's a little bit more balance in overall and a little bit more cleaner as a message. When we talk about post-processing, on this one, I already told you about the colors of the rays. Keep an eye on your white balance. You see how it's kind of keen to go for the blue because it's also confused with the rays. So just something to kind of keep an eye on. Other than that, I think it's cool. You know, it's almost like a watercolor painting, which I really like. I really like this yellow. My eyes keeps to be going to the yellow, purple, and green. And I think that's quite cool. Talking about this one, post-processing, again, keeping an eye on the white balance. So that would be the first thing to do. Not as much, but not as little. And then I would add a little bit of the vignetting. I'll probably crop it even more, you know, I would make it almost like a landscape, almost like a portrait crop to do something like this. And then, yeah, that's about it. I think it's a shame that the palm tree is really kind of isolated towards the side, but still, just reset it. Keep an eye on the, let's see if we see before, keep an eye on the edges of the stuff, and kind of my suggestion when it comes to composition on something like this would be picking up the main subject, the main focal point, and then build the things around. If the rocks should have been your main subject, I would leave the trees around and really just kind of do the few steps forward and shoot it from there. But most importantly, Stacy, next time try to send us an image with the details about how it was captured, so then we can tell you more about how to set up the camera and to tell you what we're looking at. Stacy, thank you very much for your images. Take care, and I hope to see more of your pictures in the future. Moving on the next photos, we have Tarek. Tarek, 3 images from you. And as I mentioned on the beginning of the show, we can only do 2 at a time. So let's have a look at those 2. So we have a first image right here. Very nice kind of leading line and flow through this tree tunnel. Shame it's kind of really low quality. And to be honest, Tarek, 720 on 960, 90 kilobytes. I wouldn't do you justice to do the full review on it. No details on the camera. Let's have a look at this one. Little bit more details, but again, no details on the camera. Really small image. You see when I zoom in, it gets all pixelated. I tell you what, just kind of quick overview. I think composition on this one is super cool. I think the flow through the road and through the tree tunnel really works here. However, can't tell you much about technical point because it looks blurry just by looking at it like this. Tarek, the best thing you can do is to upload the images in a better quality, and then I can tell you really fully what to do, what I think you could do differently. It looks cool. Both of the pictures looks cool for me. But this one, I'm sure if I would go in the settings right now, it would look like it's overexposed. You see, so I just need a little bit better quality of the images than this, Tarek. So if you have better, make sure you send it over. I would love to give you my review on the next show. Moving on the next photographer, we have a Theo. Moving on the next photographer, we have a Theo. Theo, I absolutely love your images. Now, this is Paris, I assume. Just quickly have a look if it tells us anything. Yeah, probably. Anyway, beautiful colors, beautiful drama, beautiful captures. Let's say we quickly jump into it. Shame there is no details on the camera again. You know, when you send pictures for a review, when you want to get as much feedback as possible, it's always good to send it with the camera details, so that way we can provide even more when it comes to suggestion and tips on what to do differently. Anyway, talking about this one, beautiful fountain with a beautiful sunset. Little bit on the darker side here. There is a little bit of glow going and happening around this woman here. Talking about this one, I think the geometry is a little bit off, but then again, beautiful sky and a beautiful texture, beautiful leading line. So let's talk about it. Technically, the sharpness is spot on. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Very nicely done. I see a little bit of noise in overall on the image. And to be honest, now when I look at it close, I see a little bit something wrong with the post-processing here. I'm not sure what happened, if there was a person in front or you done, because this doesn't seem to be really kind of connecting to each other. So just something to keep an eye on, Theo, for the next time. But technically, still stay with the technical part of the image. So obviously, really dramatic sky with lots of details in it. So well done there. Although looking again at the water, maybe there was some sky replacement done here, which is not an issue. I don't have a problem with sky replacement, but it has to be done right. And when I'm seeing that you're missing parts of the actual water coming down, that makes me think that maybe there was a sky replacement done here. So, so far, to be honest, I see more post-processing mistakes than technical mistakes. I think the sharpness is there, the light is nice, the exposure is done well as well. I think this part of the image is again a little bit too dark, but that could be coming from the post-processing again. So we leave it here. Talking about this one, again, details all the way through, which I think it works very well. Really kind of contrasty top again. I like the sky, but again, I cannot put my hand in a fire for saying that it's the original sky, although here it looks much more like it is. So we're gonna say that it is. Again, the sharpness there, it's quite interesting. Light, there's a little bit of noise, but much less on the net than on the first one. This was probably high shutter speed because the people are quite kind of sharp. So in overall, this one is for me a little bit better done than that one, but that's about it. So on this one, you're getting a little bit of glow around the buildings as well. So again, post-processing probably more than anything else. But technically, I think it's well captured. So technically, not really anything wrong. Composition-wise, I think this is great. I think you have the Eiffel Tower, you have the fountain being really kind of dominant. You have the sun, you have the obelisk or whatever it is here. So that's cool. Talking about composition here, I would keep an eye on the geometry, definitely. So let's see if we can just fix that in auto. And we can. You see, right away, we are so much better. The leading lines are great. The sky is lovely. There is just enough of everything. Very nice and dominant. Very, very nice. So composition, Theo, I think you have a great eye for composition. Technically, I think you're doing well to capture this. But now we're going to go to the post-processing. So starting with this one, I already mentioned. There is something wrong at this part of the image where it just kind of don't line up. So it's too visible. Second thing is, I think you have a way of too much of a contrast, which becomes very unnatural. So this is really, really dark. Also, this darkness gives you a glow around this part of the image. You can see it here. You have a glow around the woman here. And there is some discrepancies with the water. You're kind of missing part of the water here and here as well. So something to kind of keep an eye on. So lots of contrast and the parts to kind of check on. On this one, much less issues, to be honest, compared to this one. I think, again, a little bit of too much of the darkness here, a little bit of too much of a vignetting on this side of the image, which again creates this kind of glow around the building. But other than that, I think it's really cool. So for me, this one better than the first one on the post-processing. Few things to look at. Again, pushing it around, you see there is kind of dark edge and glow around the lamp here. So just something to keep an eye on in the future. And in overall, Theo, I love what you're doing there. So perfect eye for composition. Not much wrong with your technical skills. Just the post-processing where I would bring it down a little bit and start by few things step by step, and definitely always make sure that you check the images before you send them over, just so we kind of avoid things like this. Anyway, Theo, send us more pictures in the futures. Until then, take care. So the final photographer from the landscape category for this week is Zdenek T, and we have 2 pictures to look at here. Zdenek, let me just quickly have a look. from the last episode, we were looking at those pictures. Yes. And we were talking about this one using the brushes for clouds. So let's have a look at what you sent us this week. Here. So my first impression. So talking about this one, it's a little bit tilting. That's the one thing to kind of keep an eye on. Other than that, the light is a little bit, it's not harsh. It's just too equal. So it doesn't really create much of a contrast. Also, you can see where there is a shadow, it's a little bit harsh, and but it's not too bad. It's just more, what I think is more shame is that as there is that much light, it doesn't create that much of a contrast in overall. On this one, similarly, I think there is a little bit of a shame. So I think either I would not put the sky there at all and go with something like this, or I would like to have a little bit more of the sky there. But anyway, let's talk about it. So starting here, again, you're shooting with Canon. The settings, ISO 100, spot on, f10, definitely, especially when the elements are so close here. 1/200 of a second is fine. So the setting is actually spot on. The sharpness is spot on as well. Details on the foreground as well as the background. So that looks really cool. And the only thing I would add here is just the time of the day. Obviously, again, being, if I remember right, Zdenek, you are in South Africa. Obviously, during the day, it will bring this kind of strong light is where it will take away colors, and obviously it will make everything look a little bit flat. It will take away the depth of the field and so on. So even though you have this as a foreground element, it doesn't really help much with the depth because first of all, there is not much of a contrast in the colors, and second, there is not much of a contrast in the light. Talking about this one, I think again, settings wise, you kind of good there. ISO 100, again, good. F10, spot on with this thing. 1/250th of the second, spot on. Again, harsh light. Your foreground element has a very much similar colors as the rest of the image, so that doesn't help us much. What helps here really to create the depth is the flow and the leading line of the river. So in overall, I think this helps a little bit more, but technically it's spot on. Just again, the light, you see how it's creating this kind of harsh, dark spots. Just something to kind of think of. But I know, completely that we all can't go out just during the golden hours and sunsets and so on. It's just something to kind of look at for the future. Maybe Zdenek, in the comments, you could write us where exactly you based and what's the kind of, what's the options to go out and shoot. And when do you go out? So that way I understand more for the future of what's your possibilities. I have another friend who is from North Carolina, I believe, North Colorado. And similarly, she can only go into the parks during the day. So that way we stop looking for the golden hour and maybe look at the ways of how you can capture something like this even during the day. So that's just for the future. Composition wise, even though all the elements are here, foreground, middle ground, background, I wish there was maybe a little bit more of the sky, and definitely I would keep an eye on the geometry just to make sure that my horizon is straight. That's about it. Like this, I think it's nice. It's not the most interesting composition ever, also because it's really missing the kind of main focal point. You're kind of wondering, is it about the rock? Is it about these rocks, or is it about the flower? If it would be about the flower, I would probably crop more tight on it and get something like this. If it would be about the rocks at the back, I would want more sky to make it a bit more dominant. Then on this one, composition wise, again, I would keep an eye on my geometry, but I think in overall it kind of looks quite all right. Maybe just a little bit like this. I think the flow of the river really helps here. The foreground again is here, but it's really the river. I wonder if you have just skip this foreground at all and maybe just focus on the river, place it in the center. So just to kind of give an idea what I'm talking about, you would kind of do something like this, and now imagine the rock wouldn't be here, and then you would have this really strong flow going in. I would have kept a little bit more of the sky, and it would be nice balanced composition, and it would just be stronger that way, I think, especially when the foreground element being the rock is so much similar to the background with the color and texture that it's not really as strong as an element in overall. Post-processing, I love what you're doing with the clouds. I think it actually works. It's not visible at all. Obviously, I recognize them, but I don't think normal people would. Keeping an eye on the white balance again, just to make sure that it's spot on, but actually looking at it, you have it right there. I think the edits are nice and natural, so I think that works quite well. Obviously, you want to push always a little bit of the contrast because you want to add extra contrast to the overall image. In color, maybe adding a little bit of the saturation would help as well. Similarly, on this one, I would add a little bit more vibrance so that it picks some of the greens and really push them out. And in a light, if I go back there, I would push the contrast. And maybe in this case, when you have so much texture in the stones, I would probably push the clarity and texture as well. So it helps us to bring the contrast, which we don't get because of the sun. Zdenek, thank you so much for sending your photos. It's always a pleasure. Again, if you have a moment, make sure to shoot us the comment saying more about what's your kind of possibilities of shooting so I understand it more. And I can't wait to see more pictures from you. That same goes for all of you folks. If you want to join us for our photography review show, make sure you head to our website cleverphotographer.com/forward-review, and that's where you can find all the upcoming dates. You can find all the upcoming links on where you can upload. You can also find there links to the past episodes where you can learn more about other photographers. And for all of those who send us images, simply go into the description, you find your name there, and then you just click on the time spot and it will bring you there. Anyway, folks, take care, and until next time, keep shooting.